Welcome to Upfront on the Voice of America. My name is Jackson Vunganyi. So Africa has a long and storied history of youth activism going back to the independence movements of the 1950s and the 1960s. Youth activists played an instrumental role in the liberation of their countries from colonial rule. And it's that legacy of youth activists like Kwame Nkrumah, considered as one of the fathers of African independence and nationalism, that continues to inspire this generation of African leaders and youth activists to speak out about change, demand for government accountability and respect of the Constitution and laws by their governments. And today's youth use the same methods, but they have the benefit of more platforms and tools to mobilize and engage and voice their opinions on issues that affect them. The question is, how effective today's youth as drivers of change in their countries? Does it even matter that they have all these tools at their disposal, the social media platforms? And in the studio with me to discuss youth activism on the continent and how youth are drivers of change is Laraman Nyonto from Liberia, a guest on the show previously. Laraman, good to have you. Thank you very much for coming in today.
It's a pleasure.
And Karim Tambi.
Yes.
Karim is with the People Power movement, a grassroots movement from Uganda that is very well known to many of our listeners. Mr. Bobby Wine has been on the show a couple of times. Karim, thank you for coming in today.
Thank you,
I kind of like that hat. You should hook me up with one of those so I can.
Yes, I will.
So let's start off with you, Karim. How have you been able to engage young people in Uganda around issues of human rights, of democracy in your country?
Thank you so much, Jackson. First of all, 60% of the Uganda's population is below the age of 35. That means that the biggest majority of young people are supposed to be involved in what is going on in the country. Unfortunately, the leaders of the country right now beyond the age of 35. Most of them are in their 60s. And as I was coming in earlier, I was reading the news from Uganda that they have a retreat for the NRM government. They're trying to again change the constitution.
The government of President Museveni.
Yes, they're trying to change the constitution so that the age for
to change the constitution of Uganda?
Again.
Did you just change the constitution
no,
to allow...
they want to do it again
no
so that
limits?
If you're below the age of 45, you can't run. However, which means they're going to alienate the majority of young people in Uganda.
And more.
And more.
Right.
But my message is, Mbale set a precedent.
You have to provide context for our listeners.
Mbale was a place where we had a constitutional court, where the members of parliament took the government to court for changing the constitution, Article 102 last year.
A very contentious debate.
Sure. And coming out of that constitutional ruling, the courts ruled that the members of parliament cannot be voted into parliament and get there and then change the terms that the people who send them there.
Basically, they cannot go in parliament and make laws that benefit themselves personally.
So they want to, now the NRM government wants to propose again, because they had removed the term limit. They had removed the age limit. So somebody would stand whether you were 18.
They first removed the term limits, then they amended the constitution for age limit.
Yes, they did the age limit. The age limit was allowed because they wanted Museveni to run. And now that they're having this strong force coming of young people, people power coming in, now they want to change it to 45.
To limit the young people.
Yeah, they want
so it's about limiting and limiting young people, but allowing the older generation to be able to control and continue in power.
They have recognized the fact that young people are now having a voice. They now see where they are heading. They know who represents them. Because when you look at Museveni's cabinet and he's a member of the executive committee, none of them is 35 years old. And if you're to look at the ministers, none of them is below 35, which means ever since Museveni came into power in 1986, to people who graduated to this year in Mackay in 1996, none of the people who have been graduating are employed in the government.
High youth unemployment.
High youth unemployment.
Are they at least being absorbed by the private sector?
But no. The education is there. The private sector is also managed by the government. Because what happens is, here you have a minister in charge of land, but he's also a land agent. you have a minister in charge of fisheries, but it's also person making these deals. So it's very hard to find a government self-regulating itself. You have the army everywhere. So it has been so hard for young people to penetrate. And now that Bobi Wine came into play, they are recognizing that they have the power to take it away from them. They are really scared. They are panicking. Museveni has been giving retreats after retreat. He has been giving
his leadership. Right.
Yeah.
We'll continue our conversation with you, Karim. Let me bring in Laraman here. Laraman, how are things, my friend? A long overdue conversation. We were supposed to talk about the one-year anniversary of your president, George Weah, a little into his second year of his presidency. If you were to give him kind of a report card, what are some of the things that he has done that you're very happy with, and some of the things that you probably would ask him to change going into his second year in office?
So first of all, let me say that George Weah embodied the true aspiration of the young people, given the time he came to power. It's something not earned. He got it on his fame from playing soccer. But I think he has failed on many fronts. In the fight against corruption, young people still have a lot of questions on the 16 billion. The USAID sponsor investigation findings have been out. Few people were arrested from the old regime, and they have been free, not on bail.
Again, to provide a little context for our listeners who might not know what you're talking about, a couple of months ago, over $100 million, I believe, or somewhere close to that figure, went missing. Money that was printed somewhere in Sweden was supposed to come to the national bank, but the money disappeared anyway, somewhere between in the process. Yeah. And that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, so it constituted 5% of our GDP. And when you did the exchange, it's about 16 billion Liberian dollars. So that report is up. Few persons, like the former president's son, Charles Jalife, and others were arrested and free, not on bail, but also on compassion. So he failed in the area of fighting corruption. Also, there's this much talk about question of the 25 million, which in July of 2017, the president announced, July of 2018, I must say, announced that he's going to infuse into the economy to stabilize the economy. The presidential economic management team was established, headed by the current finance minister, Minister Toye. And there is a lot of debate around the 25 million because according to his account, that money was distributed among money changers without the use and involvement of the financial sector, which is not possible because simple economics will tell us that the key drivers and players of the economy at the financial institutions.
Was the money distributed under the table? What means did they use to distribute the money?
To black prosperity, I would say, you know, taking it from one money exchange of bureau to the next. But here's the deal. The presidential investigative team was established to prompt into that matter. And their findings have shown that Samuel Toye, the Minister of Finance, have not shown any documentation in terms of how the money was distributed and infused into the economy. So by now we're supposed to see a serious arrest of the finance minister to answer to this question. But the president is kind of lenient in terms of his fight against corruption. He has instituted another investigation by the General Auditing Commission. The president has also failed in the areas of the rule of law. He has circumvented the Constitution, the PPCC Act, and awarding contracts to Lebanese friends who are in turn giving him kickback. Okay, and a lot of young people are disenfranchised. They are disenchanted about the proceeding of this man who's supposed to be the icon and the inspiration for them, especially owing to his age and the variance between his predecessor and him.
So you're saying that for a person who came in on a platform of fighting corruption, he has not been vigorous enough or effective enough in fighting corruption. Corruption is an issue that young Ugandans have already spoken out against. Let's talk about a little bit about some of the other conversations that are happening in Uganda. Obviously, you talked about lawmakers, the current ruling party of President Museveni, the NRM, trying to change or amend the constitution. But what other issues are driving the conversation in Uganda right now?
I'll pick up from him. Corruption. Money moving in bags. You have an economy in sacks of bags giving away people cash that you will never monitor, that you will never try to track and see whether it's getting to do the job that it's meant to.
Right.
You are doing nothing more than somebody who is a drug dealer. It's like a drug cartel government, where somebody comes, he gives a sack of money to some people, and, you know, go do your thing. They will never monitor it. And
is there evidence for this?
It's all over. It's all over the news. Museveni works with sacks of money that he gives.
Why does he give away money that way?
He said it. He said it 3 weeks ago. He was on a TV interview and he said, "Oh, we've been trying to bribe people and give them money to get onto their land." So,
but to take away their land? To buy their land?
To buy their land.
Okay.
So
where the government is trying to acquire land for what? For development?
Not for development, for themselves. So we have a big problem of land. And I'll cite an example. It's a district, there's a land, I don't know whether you've heard about Apa. It's an area in northern Uganda. So people who used to live in Apa during the war of the Konyi War, they were displaced. They were moved from that area because of the war, and they were put in internally displaced people's camps. So it was around 1996, 97. So people stayed in those camps. Then years later, after the war, people wanted to come back.
To go back to their land.
To their land.
Right.
To find out that this land had been given to a South African investor. And they said their land
by the government.
By the government. It had been made a land reserve. So the South African investor...
So government came and found free land, land that belonged to people who are displaced internally, and gave it away to a
foreign investor to start a game reserve where people would come and tourists and all that. So people wanted to come and claim their land, and by the time they got there, the army stopped them. So they decided to go and camp at the UN offices in Gulu. So it has been a problem that has been happening since 2015. About 15 people have died at the hands of the government. About 1,000 huts, small huts of people, have been burnt down. And people are still looking for where to stay. So the government is also having its ministers part of the land grabbing. In Kampala, for example, there's a recent incident in Lusanja. I don't know whether you followed the situation where about 500 people were
displaced,
were
thrown away from their land.
Yeah, were thrown away, and 2 kids have died as of now.
So the land issue also ties into corruption.
Yes,
which is in part of the conversation that is happening.
It gets deeper. So what people do is they will get a court order. They go to court, they get a court order, they get you out. And the people in Lusanja were kicked off their land after a court order that had been written by Justice Esther Nasambu, who is a sister to Justice Catherine Bamugemerere, who is in charge of making on the land reform. She's in charge of the Land Reform Commission. So the sister kicked the people off the land. And the government cannot come and question Bamugemerere, neither the sister, who is also a judge.
Well, why is there no government intervention in this issue?
The government intervention had to be the Land Commission. But the Land Commission head, who is Justice Bamugemerere, has a sister who is also a judge that is involved in kicking people off the land. So
there's a lot of conflict interest, and the government is not able to come in and mediate on behalf of the people. So land issues are driving conversation in Uganda and activating young people to speak out. Let's go back to you, Laraman. What do you think is responsible for the recent decision by President Bouteflika in Algeria not to run again?
Well, I think the people's power, the protests led by students, ordinary workers, and young people in general. And I think that protest had 2 fundamental objectives. The first was to ensure that he stopped his 15 billion step, and they also want to see a total overhaul of the political system, a change in governance paradigm. They are yet to achieve that, but if they are to achieve that, I think sporadic protests will not help in this case, as it helped to achieve the first objective. They have to organize themselves. And I think the institution that's currently responsible for organizing the different protests have to take heed, Because what we have seen so far in Algeria is that the system, the sports system, is in charge of the transition. They have postponed elections indefinitely. They propose a national conference that will lead towards constitutional referendum. No exact date has been set. They ban some lead political opposition members from participating in election. And so it's clouded with the same old group of people ensuring transition, which I think the people of Algeria, I understand there's a protest ongoing today, all right, to seek redress to their second objective, fundamental objective of their protest. So they have to take heed, organize themselves, and do away with ambitious politicians and opposition leaders who want to get the benefit of their struggle.
If you're just joining us, my name is Jackson Vunganyi. We're in studio here at the Voice of America with Lara Manyoto, youth activist from Liberia. Mr. Karim Tambi is with the People Power, a grassroots movement in Uganda. Thank you both for joining us. We're talking about youth activism on the continent, some of the issues driving conversation. Let's talk about the platforms that are being used. When I was in Liberia a couple of years ago, one of the things that really impressed me was the robust debate happening on the street in the middle of Monrovia, where people were exchanging ideas in broad daylight, debating about bills that were being tabled in Parliament. Do you have that kind of robust debate in Uganda? Is that something that is allowed? Do people actually, are they free to speak out about things that are happening in Uganda, aside from happening on the continent?
Museveni has decided that freedom of assembly can only be done by the people in the NRM government. So if you're 10 people and you're having opposition ideas, they are going to come and get you up, and they're going to disband the arrangement. However, the Ugandans have decided to take on social media, and we have a very large presence of social media. We have a lot of platforms where young people engage from morning to evening, talking about issues that are affecting them. So given the fact that Museveni is trying to stop freedom of assembly in Uganda, he's not going to stop freedom of assembly online. And after realizing that people are gathering online, he decided that he would impose a tax on social media. So that's why we have the OTT.
Has that driven down the traffic on social media?
No, Ugandan youth are always active. They are active on social media, and they are trying.
But if you put these roadblocks like social media tax, that kind of tamps down the activity, no?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does to some extent. However, we have also overwhelmed them. We have showed them that we can try to afford that.
Okay.
And also communicate. However, like Honorable Chagulanyi mentioned 2 weeks ago, one of the things that he wishes to accomplish in his first year is to make sure the social media tax is scrapped.
And we're coming to the end of our show. I want to give you guys the last word, 30 seconds each. What's the best way to create synergies with these youth movements that we see on the continent right now? I'll start with you, Karim, and then with you, Laraman. I'm sure there's a lot in common that you share, whether it's the platforms, whether it's the issues. How do you create synergies?
I think one way is to recognize the power that young people have. Most of the continent is of young people, and we should first of all take advantage of that. One, by using social media, we are going to make sure we connect each other from Uganda to Liberia to Rwanda. Young people have the same problems, the problems of unemployment, the problems of poor health, problems of being included in the decision making, and all young people need is a seat on the table. To add, one more thing I wanted to add was a message to the international community before we go any further. First of all, I would like to inform the international community, especially America, is that for so long we have been played by telling us that Museveni is their strategic ally. It's been something going on for so long, but now we want America to recognize, and the rest of the international community, that we cannot have one man as a stooge for East Africa at the expense of our people. So we are calling upon the international community to rise up and see this dictator off. We need to take power back to the people.
Larman, you have the last word. Real quick, brief.
I think young people have to unify in their voice. Frank Fanon said it clearly that every generation has its own mission. We must define what our mission is in this generation. Where there is excesses in terms of governance issue, young people have to come together and unify, especially for longest-serving leaders in Africa. They need to go in places like Equatorial Guinea, Chad, Uganda, and even in Rwanda. All right, these people must give way to a progressive young generation. What we saw in 2018 in Angola was a replacement of the old system by the MPLA and a handpick by DeSantis for a new kind of leadership. He was 76 years old and turned over to a 65-year-old person. The young people, the young generation is left out. So young people have to come together, redefine what their mission is, coordinate in strategic way and form a chain network of consciousness. We have to go back to the university and build consciousness because the university represents that, the microcosm of the society. And I think a lot of university students are missing out on the current day-to-day struggle of the African people.
Thank you, guys. I really thank you both. I know we have a lot to discuss on this issue of youth activism. We will continue this online and on our radio program Upfront. You can follow us on our social media platforms. I'm at Upfront Africa. Check out us at our Facebook, keywords Upfront Show, VOA. Link with us, connect with us. Tell us about some of the issues that are driving conversation in your societies, in your countries. And like and share the page with everybody around you. This is your platform where we discuss your issues. And we'll catch you next time. Have a good one.